Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Sarah, and today I have someone I'm so excited to have here. Her name is Hattie, and this is a person who, one, I was really nervous to Hattie ask you to join because I know that you're shy. And so I was thinking, I don't want to make her feel pressure. But then I also just have like a great amount of admiration for you. I think you're a really great example of mothering and like being in a marriage when you have borderline, and like that can be very, very hard for many of us. And so I'm just so honored to have you here. And I just want you to know how much I adore you. But welcome to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That was like the most touching introduction ever. I'm going to be like crying right now already. Thank you so much for having me on. This is really something exciting for me, pushing me out of my comfort zone, which I've been working on a lot in the last few years. So really excited to be here. I am shy, like you said. Um, and I have a long story to tell about my journey with BPD and autism and my relationship, how I ended up being in a marriage successfully for 25 years and with him for 30 years. And I think it started, I know, long time, right? I can't believe it either. It's really, I'm lucky because I married my FP, really. I've just never met anybody that I like as much as I like my husband. So that helps a lot. A little bit about me. I was born in the Midwest, and there was 5 of us kids. We were in a really poor rural area, and my mom was 16 when she got pregnant with me. My dad was 17, so very young, and they really hated each other. They didn't really believe in divorce, so they stayed together for a long time, too long. It would have been better for all of us if they had parted ways. We were just really like what you would consider like a typical rural poor family, and very religious. Well, it was a racist environment. It was a bigoted environment. It was a very strict Christian environment. And we were controlled excessively and abused. But I was smart. And I think that was kind of my saving grace. I was always emotionally dysregulated. I always knew from the beginning there was something very different about me. I didn't know what it was. I just felt like I was always on the outside looking in and just could not figure out how to be human, if that makes sense. And so I went to college, and it was in college where I just started first kind of questioning my upbringing, all of the trauma I'd experienced, all of the like relationships I had seen. And I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't know what I wanted, if that makes sense. So I met my husband in college. We got married shortly after college and moved to the West Coast. We moved to San Francisco and LA, and we lived in Portland, Oregon, outside actually Hillsboro for a while. And then we moved to the East Coast, and we lived in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and we're now in Maryland. So all of that exposure to different people and different places and just different ways of thinking and diversity really changed my perspective on life. It really altered me a lot. And the whole time I was struggling with BPD, severe depression, a lot of other mental health issues. And I did not know that I was autistic until a few years ago. That was another like big learning moment for me.
Yeah, just like a wrench, right? Just like,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, it was the best thing that probably ever happened to me. It was learning I was autistic. It explained everything. And from that perspective, I was just able to be like, oh, it was just like a light bulb moment. It just made so much sense. And I think I think that's about it. Yeah, I think so. I was diagnosed with BPD about 6 years ago. And my oldest was like, you need to take the RADS-R test. You just need to take it. So he sent me the link and I was like, oh, okay. I have 3 kids and my oldest is very into psychology. And he was like, I know you're autistic. You just have to take this test. And I was like, okay, I will, honey. My understanding of autism came from like Parenthood, Max on Parenthood, or the Rain Man. And that was it. It was limited to that. So when I went on Embrace Autism and took the test, I got a 191, which if people are not familiar with that, that's a
That's
pretty high number.
high.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is a big number. There was no way there was any part of my mind was going to be able to reject that, that I have autism. I tried. I kept thinking, how do you cheat on a test that you don't know what answers they're looking for? I felt like I had cheated somehow, but eventually I accepted and then was able to move on. And now I kind of say autism is my motherboard and BPD is my operating system, is how I kind of look at it. But
Mm.
there's a lot of overlap of the two there also, I think.
There is big time. That's such an interesting, your motherboard is autism and your operating system is BPD. So it's almost like, okay, it first goes through this filter of the way the autistic brain processes things. And then often, just in observing like my husband and his autism, which I want to know what his RAD score is because I know it's really high, but now I'm like, ooh, how close are they? But like it can be very dysregulating to an autistic person to have like some sort of stimuli in their environment happens. For example, if the plans change, well, that can be very overwhelming and frustrating and even scary. And then the borderline kicks in, and then it's like, okay, now we're like supercharged in our anger or our panic, or yeah.
Yes, yes. And I found that to be exactly the case for me. I would have meltdowns over transitions when I had to pivot. It was very difficult for me being frustrated and being oversensitive to rejection, which both autistic people and BPD people have. All of those things would just emotionally dysregulate me. And then I had no skills and no way to know what to do with those big feelings. The meltdown would start to come. I would start to feel shame. And then that shame would send me into this like spiral where I just would hate myself. I would hate everyone else. And I would take all of that energy from those emotions and just project them outward onto anyone around me. And it was really, really difficult to be able to put all those pieces together once I had the BPD diagnosis and the autism diagnosis.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to pathologize here, but this is my guess. When that happened in childhood, you were not treated well because of it, at the very least, probably. And then maybe that resulted in some fear in how your husband would treat you. But I mean, patient isn't the right word because we all deserve patience, but does he not personalize your symptoms? Because that is the biggest thing I've found is like, if you don't believe that I'm doing this because of you, and you can see that this is just me, then you can just be a support and not like engage in the shame more. Is that what's happening for you guys?
Yeah, I would definitely say, yeah, he's really good at like knowing where he ends and where I begin. And I'm not so good at that. So he's taught me a lot about that. And that's really helped him just to know that like what I'm experiencing and my feelings are not his. And I did recently learn that one of the best matches for couples is someone with ADHD and someone with autism. And my husband has ADHD and I may have ADHD, but I pull more autism, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes too, his craving for like novelty and excitement in his life was sometimes met by my big feelings, my like the way I experienced the world. He kind of lived a little bit through that, so it didn't really bother him. He didn't feel like it didn't make him shut down. It made him kind of come alive a bit, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We've worked through a lot of the toxic part of that so that now, like when I have my big feelings, he can just kind of like live a little bit in the novelty of the excitement of it without it becoming a problem for us, without it causing friction for us. So I wondered if that was a part of it too, that mix of the ADHD and the autism being like a good yin and yang, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. I having ADHD and Talon being autistic feel like sometimes it does go like that, and then other times it totally butts up against each other. And so I have noticed that my borderline really helps with like the ability to have like empathy for his symptoms of autism that I otherwise wouldn't understand, you know? And so
Mm.
I appreciate that because I can see like, oh, this is like very distressing to you. Whereas like I think people with autism have often been like infantilized or like made to feel like, I mean, similar to BPD, right? Made to feel like they're being crazy for some of these like quote unquote meltdowns that don't appear quote unquote normal. And I can be like, oh, okay, like it really does not make sense to me that like what is something that is really distressing to him? Oh my God, like it really does not make sense to me if you're so distressed that one of your tchotchkes was like moved. That doesn't make
Mm.
sense to me, but distress makes sense to me.
Oh, I love that. I never even thought about that. Yeah, I'll have to observe that in my husband and see if we have some of that going on. I absolutely love that idea. I think sometimes too, when you have BPD, you're so aware of your feelings. They're so strong and overwhelming, and you really have a sense of like what they are. They're like old friends, really. You really are aware of your feelings. And my husband was never really good about knowing his feelings or expressing his feelings. And so I think he learned a lot from observing me and how I express my feelings, how I talked about them, how I learned to regulate them to help him. It helped him kind of open up more, to be more aware of his own feelings, to feel like maybe it was okay to express them in a safe place. And I think when we first got together, that wasn't the case. So that's definitely been something our journey of like BPD has gotten us to as well.
Yes, the modeling of like distress tolerance skills is like the most beautiful thing that we can do as people with BPD because everyone needs distress tolerance, but not everybody gets taught them because it's not
Mhm.
like perceived to be as much of a need, quote unquote.
Mm.
Okay, I want to go back to childhood just a little bit. So you were one of five, but the oldest.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yes.
There was a lot of
Yes.
pressure there, I'm guessing.
Yes, there was a lot. It caused a lot of resentment in the family. The dynamics were not good. I was kind of the golden child, and then I had a sister after me who was 18 months younger, and she was the one that was looked at like she was a problem, troublemaker. And my parents were very, very different people. My father was very analytical, very logical. He was a brilliant man, but he was also very brutal, very cold. And my mother was all feeling, very childlike, very incapable of taking care of herself, very dependent on others, very spiritual. And that was not a good mix. That was a terrible mix. But there, being the oldest, I was often like no man's land for them. I was like the battleground for which my parents that they fought over. One of them wanted me to be like them. The other wanted me to be like them. They both wanted me to see from their perspective, to feel the way they felt, to believe what they believed. And because they were such opposite viewpoints, it was this constant battle to get me to be like them, I think. Especially because they married so young. I think there was an idea there that they didn't get to fulfill their dreams. So eventually I could fulfill their dreams for them, but their dreams looked very different. So that really caused a lot of problems in the family. All of that put on me. And then the younger kids were kind of just like an afterthought. It was not a good situation.
Mm. Yeah, that responsibility to I don't know, keep things together, or even having to mask and kind of like a sort of code switch between mom and dad sounds like, my guess is that it was kind of like waking up every day and wondering like, okay, what next, right? And all of that is, as we know, kind of like the breeding of borderline.
Yeah, I agree. I just heard somebody say that they thought that borderline personality disorder is the inverse of narcissistic personality disorder. It means that you were probably raised by a narcissist and that there's this sweetheart in you that has to guard themselves every minute of their existence. And it's a sign that you've just been abused, that you're a good, sensitive person who has endured abuse. And so you just learn to hate bomb because you're guarding yourselves against the people who are supposed to love you and who didn't every minute of the first 18 years of your life. I kind of saw that in my parents. They were both narcissists, as best as I can tell. And I think that they produced somebody with BPD, or at least a way of using someone who used BPD as a way to survive. I would say it was how I learned to survive. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, used BPD as a way to survive. Yes, I love that. Do you have any relationship with any of your siblings?
I do with my youngest sister, and the brother who's like one of the brothers that's in the middle. Not with two of them, though. As you can imagine, it would be hard out of five to get along with everybody.
Yes.
Even if there wasn't the like extra layers of trauma and difficulty that was built in from the family dynamics. We just always don't always get along with people regardless. So, and I do have a okay relationship with my mom. It's difficult. My dad passed away and I was no contact with him. He just wasn't the kind of person that you ever went away from feeling good about yourself. So I decided that that just wasn't what I wanted to do with my time. So,
Yeah.
um,
Good for
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, that was a tough one too, because my siblings did not agree with that. They thought, especially when he was dying of cancer, they were like, no, you need to see him. No, this is what you should do. And I just stuck to my guns and I don't really regret it. I think it was the right decision for me, but they were all there. So different. It's interesting how you can have five siblings and not a single one have the same perspective about how it went, as children,
Yes.
how what their experiences are. It's all so relative.
Yes. You get very different versions of the same parents, right? And like my mom was one of seven and she was the second youngest. And uh, it's almost like the oldest wasn't a sibling in the way of, it almost more like a half sibling that you see occasionally because there was such a profound age gap. And my grandmother was always the same and always different, you know? So
Hmm.
it's just like, and the socioeconomic resources slightly change over time, but not always. There's just so much
Yeah.
mess there that I think oftentimes the younger siblings can be so shielded from the chaos of the beginning of a family system that, like, being the oldest, and especially the oldest daughter, you weren't shielded from the start of it all.
That is so true. In fact, I feel like there were many, many times where I used whatever talent I had to draw attention to me, to spare my siblings, because it was worse to see them get abused than it was to be abused. So I would do something naughty in order to get myself into trouble, or I would talk incessantly to get my father's wrath directed towards me instead. And my mother never took care of us. She just was incapable of it. So from the very beginning, I was more like a mother than my mother was to my siblings. And I think that plays a lot into our relationships with each other today. It's hard for them to see me as anything other than this mother figure. And it's hard for me to see them as anything other than these kids that I was saddled with when I was 5, you know? So I think it's been one of the toughest unlearning that I've had to do, is to see my younger siblings as full-grown adults in their own right. And it took me a long time. For a long time, I would boss them around, tell them all that I thought, what they needed to do, just like oldest do, until I learned that we're adults and they're responsible for their own lives and I'm responsible for mine. And I really had to let all of that go. And it was quite a process, but I feel a lot lighter and better now that I have.
I love that for you. So let's talk about unlearning. So one of the reasons I so badly wanted you to come on the podcast is, especially as a queer woman who, one, married a woman, so outwardly presenting as queer, and had many queer facing relationships in the past, and now is married to a trans man, although we may be passed as a straight couple, which is a very unique thing in itself. But I digress. Being a queer woman, not raised in any kind of specific religious experience or family. In fact, almost the opposite of that, because my mom was raised Mormon and there was a lot of trauma around that. And you are such an example to me of someone with a relationship to God and religious beliefs. And what we were saying earlier, right, is like not using religious teachings to oppress people or demonize people who are different than each other. And so I would love to hear your story about that unlearning process, because my guess is that's not the kind of religion you were raised in.
You're absolutely right. My parents got quote unquote saved when I was still a baby. And my father really just liked that he could use it to control. And my mother was very interested in the spirituality aspect of it, but really was a lonely person. So she would join churches that were strict and judgmental and critical in order to feel like she had community. So we were raised very, like, in a very strict Christian home. We couldn't cut our hair. We weren't allowed to date or see boys or talk to the boys on the phone. None of that. They were always watching everything that we did. And I bought into it, honestly. With that much control, it is really hard not to buy into it. So I just adopted all of their ways of seeing the world, the racist part, the bigoted part, the sexist part, and thought that was normal. It was normalized for me. So when I went off to college, I had some really good professors who, when I would write, and writing was something I was really interested in, when I would write papers, they would question my beliefs. They would say, you are writing from a very limited viewpoint. You need to push yourself. And at first, I was just frustrated because I didn't get an A. And then I was like, I don't even know what you mean, because my viewpoint was so limited. I had so little access to any other ideas other than what I had read in books. And they had very much scrutinized what I was even allowed to read. So I would try to push my mind in these new directions, and I was a little more successful, but I was still confused. Like, what do they mean, push my mind? What do they mean? It was just still so normalized for me. When we started moving around the country and just being exposed to different ideas and different people, it really started to open my eyes to the fact that most of the Christians that I knew were not people I admired or liked or respected. And a lot of other people were people that I saw were genuinely full of love and understanding and compassion for others. When we moved to Paterson, New Jersey specifically, we moved into this house on this street that had a gay couple next to us, a gay couple across from us, a divorced Jewish woman on the corner, and a Black pastor next to us and his wife. So we were living in this little diverse neighborhood. And for the first time ever, I felt like I was part of a community. They had our backs. They watched out for us. They were always kind and thoughtful and ready to help us. And I had never experienced that anywhere we had ever lived. So it started making me wonder, like, all these Christians that I grew up with who talk about love and understanding and helping each other, none of them have ever done even an inkling of what these people have done for us. I think I'm looking back and I'm thinking about the first time I ever really started questioning how Christianity here in America is. My friends all attended different denominational churches, but I only had Christian friends. That was all I was allowed to have. But I would go to every single denominational church. I was interested. I was curious, like, what is your church like versus, my church or whatever. So I went to this one church. It was a Nazarene with a boy I'd grown up with, and his family was there. And there was this girl my age, I was 16 at the time, who was visibly pregnant and sitting all by herself. Nobody was sitting around her. Nobody was looking at her. No one was talking to her. And I asked my friend, like, who is she? Is she new to this church? No, he said she's been going here her whole life. And I said, well, why isn't anybody sitting next to her? Why aren't they talking to her? And he said, because she's carrying her sin for all to see. And I thought, this is crazy because my mom was 16 when she got pregnant with me. And did they consider me the sin that she had been carrying with her? It just really put that in a new perspective. So I got up and I went over and sat by her, introduced myself, and just started talking. Before I left, I gave her my number and asked if she asked how she was doing, if she needed anything. And I said, call me if there's anything you do need, if you need help with anything. Left and didn't go back to that church. No, but it really, at that moment, I really began to think, is this the Christianity that I want to be a part of? It was the first time there was even this little tiny light bulb of understanding of that maybe this wasn't where my heart was. But Paterson, New Jersey really opened my eyes about where my heart was. I wanted to be like those people in my neighborhood who had my back, who really seemed to have a better understanding of Christianity more than the Christians I knew. And so I started reading Anne Lamott. I don't know if you're familiar with her works. She has a very beautiful take on Christianity. And she goes to a church that's very inclusive to everybody. And she said there's only 3 prayers you ever need: help, wow, and thanks. And then looking back on my life, I was like, that's it. That's spirituality to me. That's Christianity to me. So I kind of shed Christianity for a long time. I was like, not sure I wanted anything else to do with it. And in Paterson, New Jersey, my oldest came out to me. And then after that, I was like, I cannot hold on to these ideals anymore, these old ideals, and still love my children. They're incompatible with each other. And when you're a mother, I don't know why not every mother does this, but when you're a mother, you do everything for your children. Your love for them trumps all of your beliefs, all of your ideals, everything that you think you hold dear. Your children trump that. So for me, it was like the second my oldest came out, I was like, this is a done deal. I'm done with Christianity until they accept queer people into the fold. I cannot do both. But strangely, I could not let go of spirituality. Like I just couldn't let go of it because I think when you have an open mind and you're a questioning person and you're a curious person, you know that there's a lot out there that you don't understand, that you can't see. And there have been times in my life where I have prayed and seen things happen or experienced things that I cannot explain. That when I say them, they sound a little insane, but they were good, positive things, things that I needed in that moment so desperately. And I think that those moments made it impossible to let go of spirituality altogether. So what I determined was that there's really two types of Christians. There's Christians who are interested in power, and there are Christians who are interested in love, who are actually want to be Christ-like. It's 100 to 1. There's 100 Christians out there who are just interested in power, and there's one that's interested in love. But when I study like the life of Jesus, I mean, he was the first socialist. You know, he was the most radical person I've ever read about. He genuinely loved everyone, and in a time period, in a historical time period, where women and slaves were still treated like property, he treated them with such respect and with such humanity. And the idea that that was even possible at that time period just blows my mind. So I thought, if I take nothing out of Christianity, I'm going to take the example that Christ set, I guess, and see if I can like stick with that. He would have loved gay people. You know what I mean? He would have loved trans people. He loved everyone. He said, love everyone. That was his number one rule. Love everybody. And I think if I just stick with that part, I'm keeping an open mind about everything else, then I figured I can hold on to maybe not my Christianity, but spirituality at least. America might have ruined Christianity for me overall, but Jesus himself, I'm still good with. And the things I've seen in my life, these mini miracles, so to speak, I can't forget. They were just too big in my life. And I think that's where I'm at right now. And who knows what the future will bring. I just know I'm never going back to that closed-minded, fear-based, shame-based Christianity I started with.
It's such a beautiful story, especially about the folks in New Jersey, right? Because these are seemingly the people you were taught to fear growing up. And I mean, this is what we learn when we look at people, especially as individuals, is like there isn't as much to fear as we think there is, right? And often nothing to fear. I mean, I'm probably always going to be afraid of like large, straight men. But even that has proven me wrong many times. And, I just imagine you like young in your marriage or whatever and still trying to figure stuff out, seeing like this gay couple and like being confused or maybe being afraid or whatever. And like, these are your neighbors.
I do think that Christianity as it is now is such a fear-based religion. All of that hate comes from fear. And I know that for a fact because that was me for a long time. I bought into it. I was that person. And I know that I was so afraid all of the time. It is instilled that they want you to be afraid because if you're afraid, you're easy to control. So I know that, like, even when I look at Christians today and they seem so full of hate, I know underneath that hate is a lot of fear and a lot of shame. And my heart kind of breaks for them because I think that if they learn to embrace the fear and let go of the shame they could let that love in, which is just the tenement, like the foundation of their religion. So it's really sad to me. I think there are Christians out there who are doing really good work, who are showing, like the progressive Christians are really showing that Christianity is not what it looks like in America today. And I do look to them for example. They kind of, you know, inspire me and encourage me. Um, and I look at the world, and I've always looked at the world and thought that maybe it's the autistic perspective in me that you can see patterns, so easily, and you can see order and symmetry so easily, it just leaps out at you. And I see so much of that in the world, and I just could not imagine that that was there without something creating it. The design of it just really spoke to an intelligent mind, a thoughtful mind, and a mind that loves diversity, which was another reason that I think I had a smoother transition from growing up in a bigoted household to thinking that gender is a spectrum, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like God loves diversity in all things, so I didn't see how that was a problem, just looking at the world around me. But it did always feel like there was um, some kind of intelligent design behind it to me. I couldn't let that go. Even when I was trying to unlearn it, I couldn't unlearn that because I was seeing too much of it in my eyes. I
Mhm.
don't know. What are your beliefs, spiritual beliefs? Sarah, I've never asked you, and I'm actually kind of curious.
Yeah, I really like struggle with this. I yeah, I feel like I witnessed and heard a lot of secondhand storytelling about the abuse of religious communities, and especially like religious men starting very early in my life. So that was never going to allow me the opportunity to kind of develop any like belief system probably in that world.
Hmm.
But in terms of like spirituality, for me, I think like I hate to sound very, Pacific Northwest, but like getting outside and being in the fresh air and writing and being with anything that feels alive feels
Hmm.
very purposeful for me. And for me, like spirituality is, I think, like a sense of purpose because, like, with purpose, I can do a lot of things, right? So, like,
Hmm.
if I'm looking to understand why there's so much hate and I'm looking for answers to that, like that comes back to my own purpose to undo hate or to be a participant in creating more like love and more joy. Um, and there's spiritual, like, or not spiritual, but like ritualistic things that I really like to do. Like, I
Hmm.
love tarot. Um, and for me, that's not so much because I believe that the cards are like telling me something, but that it's
Hmm.
me being very intentional about what I'm trying to explore within myself and then like trusting myself to find the right answer. So that is one thing. I have a deep sense of trust in myself that even when I don't know what the answers are, that I will always go in search of them. And I feel like as long as I don't lose that, then I'll be okay.
I love that. It sounds like you're really sensitive to the divine in yourself,
Yeah.
which I think is beautiful. Yeah. That was a difficult thing for me to learn because in Christianity, you are taught not to trust yourself, especially like your body. Your body is considered kind of your enemy. Your body is flesh, and flesh is weak, and you're supposed to control it, and it's all about the spirit. So it was really hard for me to learn to trust myself. You're supposed to trust God. You're not supposed to trust yourself. If your gut is telling you one thing and the church is telling you another, you go with the church. You go with authority. And it was always the authority of a patriarchal system that I was supposed to be obeying and abiding by, which didn't seem fair. And the autist in me is very sensitive to injustice. So it didn't feel right. But after years of being told you can't listen or trust yourself, it was really hard for me to unlearn that message and learn to start listening to my body, listening to my gut instincts, listening to my own truth, um, listening to the doubts that I had, which would have been forbidden in the church as well. Listening to the part of myself that said there may be some other answers out there other than just what the Bible presents or proposes. That was another thing that I had to learn to like ignore and learn to listen to my instinct myself. And I think as women too, we have a really unique instinct, a really, really deep, wise connection to the spiritual divine in us. And to be taught for so many years to ignore that and then to be able to kind of learn to recognize that in myself was, I think, really eye-opening and really empowering for me.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right about women. It's interesting. There was two things I was thinking was one, do women have as much fear as men? Probably not, because like we're exposed to fear constantly. And so then it's easier to differentiate between, okay, well, am I really disgusted with this person or am I afraid of what I don't know and understand?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a thought. But then the other thought was my mom was raised Mormon and my grandmother was raised fundamentalist Mormon. So I'm the first like generation out of that. I was raised with a lot of the stories growing up, which I was far too young to be exposed to. But so like I really was raised with that kind of what you were talking about, flesh of like if you have sex with someone, it's only because you love them. Like I didn't understand until I was with my first girlfriend. After I'd already had sex with like 20 different people, I didn't understand like I had a clitoris and what that meant. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what that word was. I didn't know what it did. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know where it was on my body. Like that was very confusing to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I still really struggle with the shame that's associated with pleasure in sex. I don't struggle with shame around sex, but I struggle with pleasure in allowing myself to experience like orgasm. And I wonder how much of that is related to that kind of, I don't know, generational trauma and also just unconscious kind of like religious teachings in childhood, but
Yeah.
the that is something that I deeply fear about religious communities is the like what happens when you ignore conversations about bodies and sex. Like it's dangerous.
It really is. I was 19 when I had sex with my now husband, and I didn't know I had had sex. I had no idea what it entailed. They pulled me out of every sex ed class in school. I had no idea how to keep myself safe. I had no idea how to keep myself not pregnant. I had no idea about anything. Though I knew nothing about my body. I was ashamed of every part of it. And like you, I still struggle with shame surrounding pleasure in sex.
Mhm.
I think it helps that in the relationship I'm in, I feel safe and I feel loved. But for a long time, I didn't. Even though it was the same person, I just didn't. It was because it was so ingrained that as a woman in Christianity, that I didn't have a right to pleasure, that I didn't have a right to know my body, that my body was a stumbling block for men, that it was my responsibility to like cover myself or if men hit on me or slapped my ass or whatever, that was because of something I did. It was always my fault. And it was really hard to think maybe there's something bigger at play here. Maybe this isn't about me. Maybe this is about a system that's built in to make it so that one particular group benefits. And I didn't see that for a long time. I just saw my own shame and wondered what I had done wrong, really.
Yeah. Yeah, we never know until we learn, and nobody taught, right? And so that
Mm-hmm.
everything comes back to that, well, how were you supposed to know it's okay to feel X, Y, and Z when nobody taught you? And that
Mm-hmm.
there's so much we could talk about with all of this, but I have to get back to work.
All righty. I really appreciate this so much, Sarah. It's always a treat getting to talk to you. You are so delightful and just really inspirational to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I would love to have you back on.
I'd love that too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Think of any topic that you're interested in. Okay, before we go, tell everybody what one thing is that you want them to know about borderline.
I would say the one thing I want you to know is that if you have borderline, you should probably also get tested for autism. There is so much overlap, and I would not be surprised in the future if we discover that borderline is just often the way autism presents in women, since it's often diagnosed in women more than men, and for so long, autism was only diagnosed in young boys. So I just really wonder if there's a point in the future where we're all going to understand the link between autism and BPD. And I would just encourage you to test yourself for autism. You might find it's the missing link, the explanation you've been waiting for that explains so much and really helps you to know yourself and can really improve your life.
Yeah, that neurodivergence knowledge of yourself is powerful. I mean, that changed everything for me, and it sounds like it changed everything for you.
It did. It did indeed.
Hattie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Hi, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode today. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. That is super helpful for me. It helps us find additional folks who want to listen to the show, want to feel seen, family members who want to learn, and partners who want to understand. If you want to follow along to more than just the podcast, find us on Instagram at Bold Beautiful Borderline, find me at Borderline from Hell, or head over to boldbeautifulborderline.com where there's information, resources, a place to leave a voicemail to be heard on the podcast, which I love, and just general content. All of that information can be found in the show notes. And if you want to get exclusive content, which is bonus episodes, journal prompts, worksheets, all sorts of extra stuff, sometimes videos of me with my hair very crazy with kind of impulsive borderline rants, head over to Patreon and consider becoming a member. That is super helpful with creating content that allows me to destigmatize BPD and all of the other wild mental health struggles that we discuss on the podcast. A huge thanks to everyone who joins on the podcast to share their story and just generally helps keep this thing alive. Especially my friend Corey Evans from the Evergreen Band. He produced and created the music that is the intro and outro for this show, as well as the cover art that was created by my husband, Talon Abbott. Their information is found in the show notes. All of the information discussed in the podcast is purely personal experience. This is not medical recommendations. This is not therapy recommendations. There's no producer for this show. It's all me.